After the resounding success and praise from players and critics alike, it seemed like Capcom could do no wrong. What with all their big franchises popping off at the time, Devil May Cry 5 was a hit, Monster Hunter continued to rule the world, and the road to Resident Evil 3 Remake and beyond seemed set. Booting this game up late one night during a lockdown, the music swelled. And there he was, the big giant T-virus infected wall of meat. Almost as if he was there waiting for us, and to haunt my escape through Raccoon City once again. Back on the PS1, Nemesis frightened me to no end, but honestly back in the 90s, horror got to me more easily. And I was definitely way too young to be playing Nemesis. The 90s, back when parents just let their kids watch or play, well, pretty much anything. And way before they were ready. Seriously, it's rare to have a main menu that has such a chilling effect. But the RE3 remake nailed it there. Sadly, once we got into the game, it was clear this remake wasn't exactly what we were looking for. However, the path doesn't always seem to be truly set, with parts of Resident Evil 3 Remake's development being handed off and outsourced to M2, a relatively new studio that Capcom had backed and was made up from ex-employees from Platinum. It is truly hard to say how much this impacted the development of Resident Evil 3 Remake, and well, how much business got in the way here. But like the original Resident Evil 3, it meant there was always going to be some sort of asterisk surrounding this title. And while this is the worst of a brilliant run that Capcom was on, that's not to say this title was bad by any means, just well, left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. What of its length and the cut content, so it wasn't really worth the price tag that it had slapped on it. For a lot of people anyway. Because as for me, there was no way I was going to miss a new installment of the Resident Evil franchise. In the mainline canon anyway. How this game integrates with the current crop though, with it later being packaged with Resident Evil 2 Remake in the Raccoon City collection. It's clear that this is a classic case of a game almost being DLC.
Right.
Or along similar lines, before it was pushed as a fully fleshed title, similar to the Modern Warfare 3 remake, which farted its way out a little while ago. The best way to put it is,
butter scraped over too much bread.
Capcom did try to throw the players a few crumbs though, with a tagged on multiplayer Resident Evil Resistance. But I'm probably going to ignore this one from here on. It does have a fan base, so I won't throw it too much shade, with my sister sinking over 1,000 hours into it. But yeah, not for me to be honest.
We'll finish them, and show them what they can do with that umbrella.
Even though now and then, an asymmetrical game might get me. Like that Friday the 13th game that came out a few years ago. Now that game's legit. Though like Resident Evil 3 Nemesis, this installment looks to be forever the red-haired stepchild of the Resident Evil family. If you aren't aware by now, Resident Evil 3 was never meant to be the third major installment in the Resident Evil franchise. Instead, production on the third mainline installment was already underway, with Hideki Kamiya directing. Our boy Hunk was set to return on a cruise ship, and he would be trying to bring back the G-Virus. But once the PS2 was announced, this concept was binned off, and poor Hunk was forever relegated to the Mercenaries mode. So now it was up to the spin-off project, developed and directed by a fairly inexperienced Kazuhiro Oyama, with Shinji Mikami returning as producer. Developed around the same time as Code Veronica, over on a Sega Dreamcast, Capcom decided to keep this 1.9 project, as it was referred to internally, consistent with the prior two mainline titles on the PS1. So a 3 was slapped on the box to keep those over at Sony happy. As we know now, this wouldn't be the first time Capcom tried to expand their mainline games off the PlayStation platform, but like always, they come home where Resident Evil was born. This is a product of the remake era, however. So everything the players come to love about the series since Leon and Claire both survived the RPD is mostly here.
Mostly.
Though like the original third installment, 3 Remake locks the players on rails after a while, with the dream of exploring a collapsing Raccoon City being left behind after the game's excellent first 40 minutes or so, something that falls off after a while and for many left a bad taste in their mouth once they hit credits. Surprisingly early. Some could argue that this might have been the result of the COVID-19 pandemic era, but as this video goes on, it will be clear that certain cuts were made in this game clearly before that was even a thing. So once again, as a pseudo-retrospective type video, I'm going to fuse this with my passion of trophies, how's the platinum, and both the struggles and benefits that come along the way with being a player that hunts a 100% completion. Diving into a game, learning it to such a level that anything and everything just comes naturally. Or in other cases, just managing to skate by the requirements to hear that satisfying pop. So I'm Benroy, and join me as I take a deep dive into this remake of the 1999 classic. The list consists of 16 bronze trophies, 12 silver trophies, and 4 gold trophies. So what will become a recurring theme in this video, it's clear that something was cut, or instead, this was always meant to be a smaller package.
Oh my god! I was in the pool!
Now yes, the original Resident Evil 3 was always shorter in length, but at the time players were more accustomed to this from certain major releases. We used to call them weekend games, something that could be rented on a Friday and returned on a Sunday, or if you coughed up the extra cash, you could have the thing all week. And now these days, it feels like you need that much time just to install the damn game. So yeah, with a tighter package comes, well, fewer trophies. But if you want trophies quickly, then this game is certainly for you. Now the platinum can be popped in about 3 runs, if players are laser focused on leaving Raccoon City behind, whereas it only takes about 6 hours to beat, Resident Evil 3 Remake will hand over the platinum in around 20. As for myself, I'm not quite sure how many runs or hours it took, as I initially played this game back on the Xbox One. You know, the original Xbox One that Don Matrick revealed? We call it the Don Box around here, and yeah, that thing, it's an antique.
Fortunately, we have a product for people who aren't able to get some form of connectivity. It's called Xbox 360.
And it also plays TV, if you weren't quite aware. Still waiting for Project Milo to come out though.
Xbox, go home.
And the copy that I played at the time was provided by Capcom for review. So when launch came around, my platinum journey didn't start till then, with around half the list being tied to story elements and simply just playing this action-focused survival horror. The checklist isn't going to be all that long this time around. A bunch are tied to leaving locations behind and taking on the star of the show.
You shit me?
There should be just enough time to pop them all before RC is wiped off the map, but this list does encourage Jill to take on the 8-foot-plus tyrant.
Don't do anything stupid.
Not only will it pop the Nemesis Down trophy, not to be confused with the Nemesis Down trophy, this will cause the bin bag wearing freak to drop a present for Jill. Downing Nemesis before the sewer section will cause this crate to drop, netting Jill an extended magazine or a suppressor for her pistol, which also plays into the Gunsmith trophy for improving a weapon. With a lack of characters and an anemic runtime, there's no doubt each difficulty will be conquered like that. These will start to fly by once the player gets into a rhythm, so the devs over at Capcom tried to pad out 100% completion with a few extra difficulty modes, bringing the total to 5 overall. And you have to give it to the devs, both Nightmare and especially Inferno are substantial difficulty multipliers to really give those trying to escape Raccoon City a real challenge. But they really don't add that much in terms of enemies and puzzles alike. Ammo and gunpowder are more scarce of course, whilst Nemesis is on crack now, with him constantly being on overdrive. I have the feeling most players are going to use a few of their extra unlocks to ensure this doesn't hinder their progress too much. And look, no shade there, because if the devs give you this, or it's in the code all these years later, then it's fair game. And what I mean by that is, if you can unlock a few weapons from the shop, then there's nothing to complain about really. The recovery, iron defense, and assault coins are all there for the player who wants or needs a little bit of an edge, but don't want to quite make Nemesis their bitch. Because come on, an infinite rocket launcher in any game is comical. Getting the S rank on Inferno can be tight, even with the help from the shop. Nemesis will do his best to take Jill out and ramp up that death count. Being limited to only 5 saves means you're going to have to plan out when and where to use them, say before a major Nemesis fight, or just after if you're confident, with time being a major factor to the S rank. Speed and knowledge of the burning Raccoon City will be key, and maybe speed and power. Sometimes speed and power works too.
I have a policy here. Speed and power.
Go faster!
Deaths aren't a factor, but if you hit continue after dying, that time that you've amassed is gonna add up. The only technique to avoiding the death count time is once you've died, don't hit continue. Just load the last autosave or manual save. That being said, there are a few trophies here that shake up the playtime a little bit. The Minimalist trophy returns to ensure Jill can't go checking through the item box for any leftover sandwiches. Not even 2,000 words in and already a sandwich joke, eh? The Might Need You Later trophy limits the player to only 1 or fewer healing items. And why? Well, that was why really, and how disgusting it still is. Though playing on assisted can make this trophy just a little bit trivial. What with Jill's health always regenerating to caution from the danger state. And one more thing, the player doesn't even need to cure Jill of the parasite, because once escaping the drained Deimos layer, the game gets rid of it anyway. Another fun fact in this section, on assisted difficulty, the drained Deimos parasite can't actually kill Jill, as she heals quicker than the damage it can inflict. Thanks to Opti Newbie over at PSN Profiles on the forums for pointing that one out, and for a bunch of other guides that he puts up. From there, there's only a few trophies left on the list, and most of them tied to some sort of collection aspect, be that finding files, weapons, becoming the master of unlocking when it comes to safes, or destroying every Mr. Charlie doll. I do feel like there's something missing from this list, like maybe another location, or maybe another boss fight, but I'll not dive too deep into that just yet. For now, I guess Capcom gave us the 2-for-1 deal trophy. I mean, defeating 2 enemies in a single shot is cool, but this is really it when it comes to enemy related trophies. Yeah, that's it, nothing to do with hunters or anything else in the game, so I guess it's time to move on. If there's anything positive that comes from this tight runtime, it's the action-packed nature of the story that Capcom is trying to tell, feeling like a movie you'd come across late one night whilst trying to sleep. Resident Evil 3 Remake doesn't necessarily disappoint here, so as this is a Resident Evil game, I'm about to take a deep dive into the plot, so if you want to avoid spoilers, I'll provide timestamps.
Okay.
Barely 2 months had gone by since that awful night, a night that Jill and the others who escaped the Spencer mansion will never forget, but this was only the beginning of the nightmare for Jill Valentine. Survival was only the start of this mess. Jill, Chris, Barry and Brad all tried to argue their case to Police Chief Irons, but little did they know, he was already in the pocket of the Umbrella Corporation.
Shut up.
So what should have been followed up ASAP was almost brushed under the rug after the weeks trickled by. With no support from the government and some investigation of their own, this eventually led to those survivors parting ways. Chris Redfield went to Europe, only to eventually be followed by his sister Claire. Barry moved to Canada, whilst Jill decided to stay low profile. She had kicked up a stir, so now the almighty gaze of the Umbrella Corporation was fixed upon her, like the eye of Sauron watching Frodo in the One Ring, and they would have a special tyrant just waiting for her. Stuck in her apartment as the city around her seemingly went to hell, thanks to the leak over at the Arcade facility, not being contained by the explosion. Thousands of Raccoon City locals now found their peers turning on them, with the need to feed and nothing else. What was being passed off as a minor disturbance quickly exploded into a full-blown zombie outbreak, with not even the city's elite being able to hold back the tide of the undead. And with all that going on outside, Jill had fallen into a dark place. Everything she and her colleagues said would happen was now happening on everyone's doorstep. Looking upon her research and a very cluttered living space, Jill considers suicide, as Raccoon City sinks deeper into a state it can't come back from. Though it seems it was all a dream, for now, as she wakes up in the apartment that she's locked herself away in. However, it isn't long before she gets an unexpected call from her fellow STARS member, Brad Vickers.
Who could that be?
He isn't messing around either, proclaiming that Jill needs to get out of Dodge, now.
Listen, you gotta get out of there.
What are you talking about?
I don't have time to explain. You gotta get out of there right now.
Before the phone call can even end, the wall behind Jill smashes open. Now all that remains is a towering figure wrapped head to toe in black. Reaching for her sidearm, this has little to no effect on the towering tyrant. As it throws Jill onto the floor and attempts to crush her, she barely escapes, as a simple door isn't going to hold back this creature, as it keeps smashing through any obstacle that Jill places in its path. Even through the floor at one point. Now with that said floor in hand, it attempts to crush Jill before she can escape outside. Brad isn't far off either, so instead of flying off at the first sight of danger in the first game, he's now in the middle of the shit, trying to help his teammate.
What was that thing?
Damned if I know. But right now it's got a hard-on for the only 2 stars left in town, you and me.
Running down one of the main streets of Raccoon City, it's clear that there's no saving this place now. Turning the corner, one of the barricades put up to try and slow down the dead is about to fall.
Brad! Here they come!
Here!
Rushing into a bar, Brad and Jill try to find safety, but the dead aren't going to stop now. as one zombie reaches in and bites Vickers. He already knows his fate. He's seen and heard about it too many times before. So with one last heroic effort, Brad tells Valentine to go.
Are we still a team?
Always.
Then do me a favor. Don't fuck up like I did. Go!
As he desperately tries to hold back the tide, only mere moments later, the zombies are back on Jill's tail, and not even a newly acquired pistol is going to do much to stop the endless wave. Cutting through a small loading bay area, Jill comes across a survivor, but he doesn't want anything to do with her, or the rest of the city for that matter. This salesman isn't going anywhere, even when it's obvious things are going to shit. Instead, Dario runs into his safe space and locks himself inside.
The only safe place is in here.
You really have to wonder if his safe space would withstand a thermonuclear blast. I mean, we all know a fridge can. After a few zombies get off at the wrong floor, Jill has a clear shot to the helicopter, when out of nowhere, he's back. So with some quick thinking, Jill jumps into Ethan Winter's car from Resident Evil 7 and rams the tyrant head on. After both tumble off the parking garage, the demon still isn't down, and once the fire engulfs him, this just goes to reveal the stapled together mess underneath. Now Jill can look back at her pursuer's eye as Nemesis continues to close the gap.
Hey!
When out of nowhere, Nemesis catches a rocket, flinging the projectile off in another direction that was clearly meant for him. Wasting no time at all, Carlos fires again, with a quad-barrel rocket launcher, it should be noted, but the damage only seems to be superficial. Just remember this piece of equipment obliterated Mr. X in the prior game, and the original tyrant from the Spencer Mansion. After a quick chat and some charm from Carlos later, the two head down to the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasures Service Forward Outpost, situated in an underground station. The plan was to find as many survivors as possible and ride this thing out of the city. Immediately, the platoon leader Mikhail Victor recognises Valentine, but can't quite place her first name.
She is an elite operative of RPD, Special Tactics and Rescue Service. Her name is something Valentine.
It's Jill.
This probably because she was at the top of Umbrella's most wanted list. Running down the situation, it's clear the UBCS has taken a beating, and Mikhail isn't even above himself to ask for a little help. There's a problem though, the lines are down and they need to be powered back up. So of course, Jill takes it upon herself because video games need to happen. That's why we're here.
Alright. I'm in.
Heading up into the city streets once again. This part of Raccoon City is quieter, but that's only because it's already fallen to the undead. Using a red barrel for the advantage, and a shortcut for a donut shop, we'll have Jill at the subway station. But there's just one problem. She needs to take a detour and turn the power back on at the source. Putting out a fire and finding a familiar pair of red bolt cutters will have Jill come across another UBCS member, Murphy Seeker, who's definitely seen better days and can hardly stand at this point.
Don't look at me like that, alright? I'm not ineffective.
Before the two can get properly acquainted, Nikolai Zinoviev puts a bullet straight through Murphy's skull, showing his true colours straight off the bat. He makes it clear he's out for himself.
He would have turned. There's your sense of self-preservation.
Jill, taken back from the encounter, is still trying to deal with the loss of her own team members, so this jab at stars from Nikolai must cut deep. Now with a shotgun in hand, because again I almost forgot the shotgun somehow, Jill is ready for any infected pups, this time around. Though what is to come might take her by surprise, as she probably should have taken note of the coffee shop earlier. Those at Sigourney's probably would have had some pointers for her against these alien looking assholes. That and Will Ripley probably could have pointed out how to avoid this nightmare. Yeah, it isn't nice, is it? And just makes Jill want to go in and get out as soon as possible.
Gross.
Thankfully, once the breaker has been flipped, the power shoots back into life and melts the drained Demos lair. Now it's just a case of flipping some switches at the subway station. Oh, second thought, he's back! Living up to the terror of the original, for only a few streets, Nemesis will hunt Jill down until she's gotten to the subway station, and then he'll give her the slightest break, as he's off creating a few friends who really want to give Jill a big old kiss. Avoiding those freaks and some extra zombies, Jill gets another unpleasant encounter with Nikolai, who's making it pretty clear he's not a nice dude. I mean, look at him, he looks evil as fuck.
Why is she here?
She's hoping to get the trains running again.
Bad time to start getting dead weight, friend. She's unreliable. Can't pull the trigger when it counts.
Before Carlos and Jill can get to safety though, Nemesis is clearly getting a bit jealous as he wants a piece of the STARS operative. So for now,
It's time to split!
and all Jill can do is promise more stars as she runs for it.
You want stars? I'll give you stars!
With a game of Ring Around the Rosie and some well placed red barrels, Jill can finally get another break from her stalker. But this means it's time to take a scenic route via the sewers. And she won't want to stay down here for too long, as Jill won't be going deeper underground just yet. And there's some unique horrors lurking down here too, as far as the Hunter Gamma variant goes. Once they open their mouths, it's time to nope right out of that situation. Reading a few diary entries explains their origin, but they just need to be killed with anything, even fire and brimstone. Thankfully the grenade launcher is down here and can help facilitate that. Now heading up back out of the sewers, it's time for another Nemesis scripted chase. But this time, he's borrowed a flamethrower from Dingo Dial. Climbing up this partially completed building, it seems as if Nemesis is always around the corner, but now Jill has another problem on her hands. The fire spewing out from that flamethrower is climbing faster than Jill can. It surrounds her, one wrong step and it could be her folly. Making it to the summit of this skeleton building, Nemesis is there to meet Jill. But this time, she's ready for a fight. As the two go to blows, Jill ducking and weaving around the tyrant, she uses the flamethrower to the tyrant's disadvantage. Nemesis is still pushing forward until his body gives out, and Jill narrowly survives falling off the building. With all looking to be clear, it's now time to regroup with Carlos and the rest of the UBCS, when a familiar face makes a surprising appearance.
Kaboom! Jill!
Kendo, you're alright.
Yeah, all right's a stretch. Sorry, I got a little jumpy there. Didn't know quite what to expect.
Kendo's back, and Jill tries to recruit him, but Kendo has his own reasons for staying behind. So respecting the man's privacy, Jill continues her journey back to the subway station, when the stalker returns for another round, though this time he's come better equipped. Wielding a goddamn rocket launcher, Jill has to flee once more, because there's no way she can dodge all them rockets. Turning every corner, there's a new surprise for Jill, when she's eventually catapulted via an explosion back to the shopping plaza. It's time to take a right at the toy shop, where Nemesis decides he's going to continue the tradition of Resident Evil of having a character run away from a Crash Bandicoot-esque object. Hooking back up with Carlos, he comes in for the save with a well-placed claymore, showing that sometimes camping is just the way forward, and will net you a few trophies in Rainbow Six Siege.
Swapping next.
After he gets some shots off at a gas truck, it all seems like Nemesis has been subdued once more. However, this tag team doesn't last long, as Carlos has new orders and heads off with Tyrell, leaving Jill and the rest to catch the train out of the city. But before Carlos leaves, he makes sure to make a promise to Jill.
It's alright, you're going ahead. But I'm not gonna die on you, leave you in a cold, cruel, Carlosless world.
Okay.
On board, Nikolai is ready and waiting to make his own remarks. Now with the train heading out of the city, Jill can't help but eavesdrop on the conversation between Nikolai and Mikhail. It's clear nobody trusts Nikolai, and they shouldn't really. Though before the chat can continue, Nemesis is here to crash the party once again. At this point you really have to wonder where and how Nemesis even got here, but the rest of the plot needs to happen, so video games. So after all the civilians die, Nikolai locks both Jill and Mikhail in the train car with the tyrant. Knowing he's done for, Mikhail isn't ready to go down without a fight, and yet again we see Nemesis explode.
Get off my train, shitbird!
This time courtesy of some C4, so maybe that will do the trick. Carlos and Tyrell arrive on their way to find Nathaniel Bard when they stumble across some commotion. Marvin is trying to reason with a now zombified Brad that has found his way all the way back at the RPD. Now it's not really sure if the devs over at Capcom were trying to expand upon the T-Virus infected hosts with this scene, but it's clear that Brad still has some humanity left in him, or at least some memories, as he apologizes. Then biting Marvin in the process, the cop heads back inside as Carlos has to finally put this STARS member down for good. After blowing his way through the RPD, Carlos gets in contact with Bard. Now it's up to him and Tyrell to find Bard and his vaccine when Carlos learns of the train's fate.
Jill, come in! T, I gotta go.
Battered and bruised after a train crash, Jill makes her way to the surface once again, but so does a certain stalker, who unfortunately for Jill, can swim. Now it's down to a game of Minesweeper, with Nemesis in his stage 2 form, which is more beast-like than ever. Several mines and grenades later, Jill can finally make her way to the clock tower, when Nemesis gets up once more. This bio-terminator just won't stop, and in the process of escaping the creature, it infects Jill. All whilst Nikolai watches from the shadows. Now it all rests on Carlos's shoulders as he needs to get the vaccine from the hospital as Jill is left unconscious to fight off the infection. Blowing past legions of the undead and bloody hunter betas, yeah, because we all needed these nightmares in the RE engine. Carlos discovers that Bard has been shot. Umbrella is doing anything it can to clean up its tracks now, though that won't stop the doctor spilling the beans on a short recording, showing Carlos the true sinister side of Umbrella.
All of Raccoon City's suffering began with the release of a biological weapon known as the T-Virus. My employer, the Umbrella Corporation, engineered this virus
that he's been shielded from all this time. With the vaccine sample administered to Jill, she won't be back on her feet for a little while, so now it's all down to Carlos to make a stand in the hospital lobby, Resident Evil 4 style. And just before this, they all find out that the city is about to be destroyed, as they're warned on the TV that they're gonna be nuked. Now this is a bizarre change to how the original went down in 1999, because if Umbrella are trying to cover this all up, why would it be broadcast for all to see? After Carlos fights off the horde of the undead, Jill heads back deeper underground, where surprise surprise, there's every type of BOW down there, waiting to get a piece of that sandwich. And a new enemy enters the mix, yet annoying Paleheads. After playing with a bunch of scissor lifts, Jill's #1 fan is back, and this time Nemesis takes out Tyrell in the process.
No!
With no turning back, Jill has to find more vaccine in Nest 2, a creative name there, and staying clear of the creature that stalks her. But of course, in steps Nikolai to steal the vaccine that Jill's just made, and kindly enough, he also sets up a boss fight.
So let's make a deal. You go down there, battle the Nemesis, and I'll record it all and sell the combat data. Put on a good show, and maybe I don't need the vaccine. Agreed?
Did someone tell him this was a video game? After a bit of red light green light with Nemesis, Jill and Carlos flush him into an acid bog. So now all there's left to do is find Nikolai, and oh bloody hell, Nemesis has become a giant meat wall and just won't take the hint.
Look, just so you know, this is the last fucking time.
So of course, Jill finds a fucking railgun and blasts Nemesis into oblivion.
Come on! Next time, take the fucking hit!
I'm convinced Nemesis would probably get back up after this, but soon enough, a nuke is the double tap needed to end this creature for good. Saving Carlos from Nikolai, it comes at a cost, as Nikolai destroys the vaccine. Now it's Carlos' turn to repay the favour, before they leave the money-hungry evil bastard to fry, along with all the T-Virus infected residents of Raccoon City. they escape just in time, Jill vows to take down Umbrella.
I felt empty and cold as the heat from the blast washed over us. All this death wasn't caused by a monster-making virus. It was greed. Human greed.
Unlike the Resident Evil remake, for the original Resident Evil and the 1998 sequel, Resident Evil 3 Remake really went through a blender before it came to market in 2020. Now of course, there's obvious aspects to point out, like the redesign of the main cast and the titular tyrant, but that just comes with the territory today, and you can get the original Jill outfit from 1999 with skirt this time, which honestly is fine. Look, as long as the original aesthetics are there, I'm not one of these people that needs to see up a digital character's skirt. We have the incognito browser for that.
It's cool, we all want the same thing.
I also love the throwback Stars outfit that Jill gets, beret and all. Carlos also has a throwback skin, but honestly I'm gonna go out there and say, his redesign top to bottom is better than the original. Floppy afro and all. Shame Capcom didn't include a throwback Nemesis skin here as well, because it really took me a minute to accept the new look. That original design was so iconic, it was on all the box art for years. However, like with Jill, I've grown to like both the redesigns as well. And the new voice cast nail it also, something I didn't mention in the Resident Evil 2 remake, but Capcom have gone out there and cast some decent voice actors. Well, that was at least until they recast Ada Wong in the Resident Evil 4 remake, but I'll get to that when I get to that game. But going back to the bin bag wearing enthusiast himself, I'll touch on Nemesis in more detail soon enough, because there's not really any other bosses in this game, is there? And he deserves his own section in this video. It's always fun, even nostalgic in some sense, to revisit a level from a prior game in a new one, even if said level was only played like a year ago or so. This happened both with the original Resident Evil 3 Nemesis and 3 Remake.
What the hell was that thing?
And sure, it's a handy way for devs to reuse assets, but honestly, I'm always game for this, as long as it's done right, or a lot of retooling went into it, to make those levels and environments have new experiences, like with the Yakuza series and Far Cry Primal. So returning to the RPD in both games was like putting on that one jacket that just fits, even if the player can only explore a portion this time.
Now here's a weird fucking door.
Leave it. We're here for Bard.
Things like this just help connect both those games and make Raccoon City feel more realised as a digital landscape. Though this time there's a twist to how this precinct is featured. In RE3R, Jill doesn't get to clock into the office one last time. Instead, Carlos makes his way there with Tyrell. This also means that Nemesis never appears in this part either, as he's laser focused on Jill. So Brad needed to die another way, which I covered in the story roundup. I'm honestly split on this decision, because his death back on the PS1 was so memorable, and actually showed Nemesis achieving a goal in some sense, to kill all the Stars members. Hell, even the 2004 movie, Resident Evil Apocalypse, showed that tyrant taking out a bunch of Stars. Say what you will about the Paul W.S. Anderson series, especially what they eventually did with Nemesis giving him feelings. Stars. But that scene was at least cool for a young teen like me back in the day.
Respect.
The RPD section feels like an excuse to stretch the legs of the RE engine, and how its chops go against an action slant. Well, those of us who played Devil May Cry 5 know this engine can handle action just fine. And Carlos isn't about to go all Dante on us right now. And for anyone who cared, we now know why there's a big hole in the showers. But other than that, this section is short and sweet, and gives us a reason to fight some lickers. Instead of swinging by the RPD, Jill heads straight to the relocated gun shop for the remake series. Yeah, we get one last scene with Kendo. Now of course this takes place before Leon swings through here.
He said, don't move.
I'm just passing through.
As RE3 takes place before and after the events of RE2, and in the middle in some sense. It's an overarching narrative. I honestly think that it's super neat that we see this character again, and some people might say this is pandering or fan service and the whole red letter media meme of
I clapped when I saw it!
But I did clap. And this time, he's not that much of a hard ass. We know what's behind closed doors, but Kendo's more than willing to help out his old buddy, Valentine. Part of me wishes the Ghost Survivors mode was canon to some respect, as Kendo made out of Raccoon City in that mode. Stick him in the BSAA and have this old geezer fix up some weapons. Instead of Chris having to punch all these boulders, he could blow them away with a massive magnum. Now it's time to get to the cardinal sin of this video, because how could Capcom cut my beloved Gravedigger? Of all the things in the world, they cut this overgrown worm. Now yes, I bet some players out there forgot this boss was even a thing back in the original Resident Evil 3. Not me, you bastards. I guess it's more of a case of curiosity at this point, because I would just like to see how the devs implemented this BOW into the RE engine. But I guess now, we'll never know. Years ago I speculated that the Gravedigger could be reintroduced by somehow accidentally saving Jill from Nemesis before a fight broke out, and back then I was unaware that there was a William Birkin vs Nemesis comic that existed, and in that the Gravedigger ate Nemesis and Birkin whilst they were fighting, in between their events in their respective games. Thanks to my comment section for pointing this out. This comic was translated and put onto YouTube in the end, so fans of Resident Evil can go and check it out. And again, thanks to the comments for just pointing things like this out. It's kind of why I want to do videos like this and learn more about the things I love. So if anyone else wants to point out these obscure Resident Evil things, just let me know. And when it eventually drops, word of warning Capcom, don't you fucking dare cut the gulp worm from Resident Evil Code Veronica X. Or I'll eventually complain about it in a video one day. The decision making / choice mechanic is also gone from Resident Evil 3 Remake, and while it just adds to the list of things cut, honestly, I'm not all that bothered about this one, especially when it comes to cinematic games and their singular narrative. Choices either just get messy or become inconsequential. Sure, you could kill something in one way or another, or get item A instead of item B. Where I disliked this the most was in Gears 5, but that's for another video when I eventually cover that franchise. And if there are any Gears of War fans watching, let me know. Maybe an unpopular take, but I don't think they'd fit here. I liked them back in the 1999 game, but not in the 2020 remake. I was fine with them being gone.
You want stars? I'll give you stars.
Now for the big one, and not a joke. I mean, I missed the Gravedigger, but this one's serious. Capcom gave the fans blue balls when it came to the clock tower in the remake, because we get to see it in all its glory in the RE engine as you look up, but only from the outside. Yeah, still to this day, 4 years later I'm bummed out about this one. Especially as the clock tower was such a pivotal section in the original. Now sure, other areas were chopped and changed, or outright cut, but this one hurts. This is where Jill almost escapes, becomes infected, has a grueling showdown with Nemesis, and then the player takes the role of Carlos. But now it all just happens outside the clock tower, and it's all mushed together. The clock tower has now been reduced to a Hollywood set. You know, the ones that look great head on, but if you go around the side or around the back, you'll find nothing there. And I know that's what happens in actual video game development, but the clock tower in Free Nemesis was an environment. Now, it's just set dressing, and thanks to the nature of the Japanese dev scene, how nothing ever really leaks from out there, like it would in the West, we'll probably never know if this location was even considered as part of the remake at all. Resident Evil 1 had the Spencer Mansion, 2 had the Raccoon City Police Department, and the clock tower was the defining location of Resident Evil 3. Now I'm going a bit long with this section, so I'm trying to keep these changes to major ones. Because yes, spiders aren't here, just like they weren't there in the Resident Evil 2 remake, but honestly, we can live without that, can't we? When it comes to the traditions of Resident Evil games, well, they all basically end up the same way, don't they? Wherever the player is at the end of the game, that's gonna blow up in the end. You know, just to keep things tidy. The Spencer Mansion in RE1, the RPD technically goes up in 2, and the entire city in 3, and so on. I'm even gonna count the volcano blowing up when Wesker's in it at the end, shouting. And in 3 Remake, the city is still wiped from existence, but this time, it goes down slightly differently, because in the first game, this really felt more like a cover-up, to hide the T-virus outbreak and stop zombies and other BOWs from infecting the world. But in the remake, it's just broadcast over the TV. This is just a wild choice, and will probably be never brought up again in any meaningful sense. But for loreheads like myself, it will always be in the back of my mind that this was just made public, and not some sort of accident or something else easily covered up. The final major change I'll touch on, for for now, will be how the game comes to a close. There was no waste disposal factory anymore, as now it's just part of Nest 2. So this isn't altogether a proper cut, as they fused elements from the waste disposal factory into Nest 2. Instead of this place looking grimy, rundown, old, rusted, and just used, it's now slick, just like another Umbrella Corporation facility. And I guess this does go hand in hand with Resident Evil 2, and makes them blend more in some way. But I don't know, man, I really prefer the vibes in the original, but not the puzzles that came with the factory. Fuck that. And this time, as the ending was set in stone, there was no multiple endings to earn. This means we sadly don't get Barry Burton returning in his cameo role.
I couldn't let you die.
Is it you?
Are you ready to finish this?
This might not bother some, but again, as a fan of the RE lore and the ongoing narrative, this cuts deep. Now I know we don't want a small galaxy syndrome going on here, like we see with Star Wars, because I think at this point every day of Darth Vader's life has been written down or shown on screen, but moments like this with Barry just made sense. I hope Barry isn't forgotten going forward either, as his story still isn't even resolved, with the ending of Resident Evil Revelations 2.
But for now, I have this.
As for Carlos, I'm not sure we'll ever see him again. What with him now sharing the same voice actor as the remake Chris Redfield? And if this is the case, at least he was vastly improved in the 2020 outing. It's just sad to live in a cruel Carlos's world now.
Sorry, Ethan.
No! What? Why?
With this game mostly being focused on a single character, that means the player is going to obviously have fewer choices in the base loadout. Unlike the prior remake with its dual protagonist nature, all the weapons are now available to Jill. Well, bar the CQBR assault rifle, which does the trick when searching the Raccoon City Hospital. RE3 Remake's weapons are really what you'd want from a game where you fight the undead. They're kind of the meat and potatoes, they do exactly what they say on the tin, nothing more, nothing less. We have a competent pistol, a satisfying shotgun, and a robust grenade launcher. The Lightning Hawk also makes a welcomed return. Jill's G19 handgun feels like it packs more of a punch than what we got in Resident Evil 2 Remake. Both of those handguns felt really weak until maybe the last few hours of the game. They really needed their upgrades. And speaking of upgrades, Jill's handgun only gets better with its upgrades. The laser dot sight, the expanded magazine, and the moderator, which is a suppressor. It's a suppressor. Though it makes this head popping, knee exploding zombie killing machine that much more lethal. I still get a little hesitant using it as a first choice against some of the more beefier BOWs, and of course, it's a last resort against Nemesis. But against the endless undead hordes, it's one of the better pistols that Capcom have ever made. Though not the best, cause that's in Resident Evil 4. But where would any zombie game worth its soul be without a trusted boomstick? The M3 shotgun starts off brilliant, being able to turn a zombie's head into T-Virus jam, as well as hold off an extensive lineup of BOWs. Without this tool, fighting the hunters is a nightmare. And when trying to save your grenades for Nemesis encounters, the M3 is crucial to get through that sewer section against the Hunter Gammas. They're fucking nightmares.
What the fuck was that?
At the risk of repeating myself, the custom parts for this shotgun changed the game. The tactical stock, semi-auto barrel, and shell hoarder all transform this shotgun, giving this gun a phenomenal fire rate and longer times between reloading, which again really help out for the hunters, as you can stun lock them without having to reload. So I would say this is an all-timer Resident Evil shotgun right here. Jill can't really ask for more in desperate times. As this game is faster paced, with bigger and badder BOWs out there for Jill, she'll need something with explosive potential. So found in the sewers, the MGL grenade launcher is essential. The bigger brother to Claire's GM79, this semi-auto grenade launcher can fire faster and more types of grenades. Explosive, flame, acid and mine varieties are all available to Jill throughout Raccoon City.
I'm gonna kill you!
And also via a little chemistry magic.
And I know the chemistry.
Which leads me into the ammo crafting. which returns from RE3 Nemesis back in '99. A key feature for the STARS member on the run, crafting ammo from various gunpowders allows some much needed flexibility to decide what kind of firepower is needed for the next encounter. The same goes for the grenade types. Want to make more shells for the shotgun? Then you can do it. But if you'd rather risk the dice roll and make more pistol rounds, then go for it. Or saving the higher grade stuff for the Magnum is an option too, but not really one I relied on in the remake. It's functional and packs a punch to anything that dares gets in its sights. Though as it comes so late in the game, it feels like the rhythm's already been set. The combo of the shotgun and grenade launcher just work. For me at least. However, I will say this is a saviour in Nest 2, especially those sections filled with pale heads. One clean shot to the head and that puts these disgusting fuckers down. And I should probably also mention the defense weapons are now gone. In a sense anyway, because they're still here, the flashbang and grenades are still available, and you still get a knife, but they're not used in the same way as Resident Evil 2 Remake now. The knife doesn't break, and it's used in a more of a traditional sense now, being that you use it to test if those fucks on the floor are gonna get up or not. RE3 Remake also allows for bonus weapons, and the coins to help the player throughout the game, but who would use any of them? That's cheating, right? There is one mechanic that I wish would always be around in the Resident Evil franchise, but I know it isn't for good reason. It would break the flow of survival horror and all the tense pacing of the games to come after this. But here, in Resident Evil 3 Remake, the dual dodge isn't only a godsend, but it's a bloody work of perfection now. As when it came to the original, I don't know man, that dodge mechanic had a mind of its own. I swear, this is vital in those early Nemesis encounters, especially when he starts swinging all over the place like Tarzan, or Roger Moore as 007 in Octopussy. And then for this recent playthrough for the retrospective, Nemesis just started pulling out combos and using them on me. There were times that I felt as if he was Brock Lesnar obliterating me with a suplex and throwing me into oblivion. So the dodge is hands down a lifesaver this time around, and makes this game feel so much more cooler once it's perfected, when you get that perfect dodge, and also if you aim afterwards, you get a bit of slow motion action, just to sweeten the deal. The Carlos punch is neat too I guess, especially when you get to hit a hunter on its arse. So with the levels on offer, or probably best described as the environments, the Resident Evil 3 Remake breaks from tradition. What with there not really being 3 major locations? Towards the latter hours of Resident Evil 3 Remake, Jill does get funneled into the hospital in Nest 2, but at the start of the game it feels more like a scattershot, with Raccoon City itself being split up into many sections, obviously so the devs can hide some loads, but thankfully you're not crawling through a crevice for about 5 minutes. You know, like in Final Fantasy VII Remake, or God of War or something like that. Now trust me, I'm not saying the game had to go open world by any extent, and I didn't want the scope of a GTA style city either, but still it feels a little obvious, especially as zombies can't follow you from location to location, like they could through the RPD. I know Nemesis can, but still, the zombies just wait around for you. I really do think that opening part of the city needed 1 or 2 more districts to make it feel like a big city. That might have eased the pain of losing the clock tower. The game opens solidly enough, but the first go around, the player might not notice how much of a ride they're on as they escape through the city. And don't get me wrong, I still really enjoy this section, but it's all over in about 20 minutes. Then after slowing the pace right down, Jill enters the downtown district, which again, on the first playthrough had me hooked, but running through this a few more times and you can really see the seams here, what with the donut shop being a real filter between streets. And once going down the business district, Raccoon City just kind of ends, and like I just mentioned, it feels like there should be a few more streets after that, but that's all we really get for Raccoon City in the modern age. When back on the PS1 it felt like the city just kept on going, and it had more going on, and played so much better into the stalker mechanic of Nemesis, leaving us all to believe that the tyrant could show up anywhere and any time. It's aspects like this that show that 3 Remake just didn't get the same love as 2 Remake, and really kneecaps 3 Remake's potential overall. The substation feels more like a house of horror than anything else, and I'll dive into the terrors inside in just a bit, because once you go in the substation, you're out within 5 to 10 minutes, max. All the underground sections like the subway station and corridors just get Jill from A to B. Even the sewers, even though I went to bat for them in my last video, and their appearance this time just feels, well, mandatory. but a clever reuse of the assets I guess. Though I would say the hospital's been improved on quite a bit, because this time, it feels like an actual hospital. It is cramped, zombies lurk around almost every corridor, and it might be the darkest place in the game, even darker than the streets outside. Drawing from the RPD in 2 Remake, the hospitals have a real atmosphere to them. Even though they're a bit of a short stay for Jill, the creative use of blockages are back as well, which personally, I really appreciate. They look as if they were put up by people trying to survive, or knocked over by the dead, and work for some intuitive game design to get around the hospital. The Nest 2 is different from the one we see Birkin based in. It feels like the people that work here are lower down in the food chain. This whole place is more of a utilitarian nature to it. This is the working man's nest, whilst all the big shots work over in Nest 1. There isn't really a grand cavern here or massive corridors. It's all compact and makes the combat pretty dangerous, even in this late stage of the game. There is that one cavern at the end before you get on the elevator, but that's like the only one, so I'm going to stick with this point. The scissor lift section is inventive, but I suspect this was made for Resident Evil Resistance, as I feel like a lot of those maps had those scissor lifts in, or similar mechanics. I guess as the game comes to a close, Nest 2 does what it sets out to do. Nothing more, nothing less.
Oh no.
Compared to other games in the franchise, I'm going to go out there and say that puzzles were really an afterthought in Resident Evil 3 Remake.
It almost looks like I could get this working if I plug in the right whatever it is.
And when you look at a list of them, most of them are lifted straight from Resident Evil 2 Remake, with the same codes too, creating a sort of paradox timeline, more so than ever before, because how can Leon, Claire and Carlos all collect the same hip pouch from the same safe? Who's restocking this? Marvin? The subway station routing is a cool little puzzle, but hardly anything that Denzel Washington had to deal with when he was on the job. There is an effort to make the first safe somewhat interesting, by hiding the code across the street in the pharmacy, but honestly, this is basic level stuff. Oh, and there is another safe in the hospital, but they're just safes. I guess I'm spoiled by the Last of Us Part 2 safes, when they actually clicked when you got the right code without knowing. Charlie dolls replaced Mr. Raccoon, and that's all I have to say about them. They're around the game and well, just there. Once you shoot them, they're gone forever. Seeing all the Mega Man iconography about, it's a shame that they weren't, well, little Mega Men, or all the Mega Man characters. I'm not really a Mega Man head, but seems like a missed opportunity there. Exploring all the shops before heading down to the subway will grant Jill a few coloured jewels. These will net her some decent upgrades, so they're all worth going for, especially before Nemesis inhabits this section. To grab these, you'll need the bolt cutter and the lockpick, proving once again that Valentine is the master of unlocking.
It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
As expected, the Resident Evil 3 remake has a fair few familiar faces returning. For one last hurrah, the same sublime zombies are back, and in greater numbers, especially towards the end of this breezy experience. These ghouls react in all the same ways as the prior remake, so a seasoned player will know how to deal with them. Though I don't think there's anyone out there playing 3 Remake before 2 Remake. Though at least I hope not, so just be sure to remove the head.
Or destroying the brain. I'll repeat that, by removing the head or destroying the brain.
But for those trying to save some ammo and can't master the dodge, just pop a knee off or two. Arms do fall off as well, but they don't really benefit much in combat. In the business district, I found the zombies around this area to be the most deadly for Jill, what with them falling out of the scenery and clustering up real fast, and also being a folly once the big meat bag is in the mix. Little touches like this help distinguish 3 from 2 at least. And if I'm honest, I'll always be a sucker for a red barrel, and they come in plenty here. Seeing those things decimate a group of the undead never gets old. But like certain sections in 2 Remake, if the player gets a little bit too far from the zombies, they drop in resolution and frames. I'm only mentioning this here because I didn't mention it in the last video, and it kind of works in the enemy section. And I'm also not a tech wizard, even though I've been working in and around video for about a decade now. For a technical breakdown and things like that, it's best to go check out Avalanche reviews. It's when playing as Carlos though, that these undead freaks really shine. Showing up in the numbers you'd want them to, unleashing lead into a crowd of them just rocks. For all the downsides of the remake, Capcom at least nailed this aspect. And after all, zombies are the lifeblood of Resident Evil. The ending section for Carlos is a fair swan song for the zombie in the new era, what with them truly testing the player and all their combat skills, as well as spatial awareness. They really can still sneak up on me, so late in the game. Acting like the Resident Evil 4 cabin defense, this resembles something that we used to have over on the PS1, but is weirdly missing. Yep, it's time to complain about the lack of mercenary modes in the remake. This shouldn't have shipped without mercenary modes, and we all know this decision came from the top, not those in the trenches. I just don't know why they would cut mercenary modes, unless they would want to replace it with an online mode that not many people would care about. You know, something that could have loot boxes and a bunch of microtransactions. Suspicious really, I just don't know why mercenaries was cut, even though they could have put all that shit into that mode as well. Someone over at Capcom really wants Resident Evil Online to be a thing, and they just need to accept it's not going to happen. Yes, some modes can be fun, and games like Operation Raccoon City entertain some, but games like Outbreak and Outbreak 2, those are the games and experiences Capcom should be looking at to make an online Resident Evil experience. And before I move on, who remembers RE Versus? Yeah, remember that cel-shaded weird thing. And this final section playing as Carlos is really my case in point. Like other great games over the years, they chop up their story levels and make them multiplayer maps. Just look at Gears of War. Epic made 3 brilliant Gears of War games and at least 2 games with excellent online multiplayer. There are so many sections in Resident Evil 3 Remake that could have been mercenary maps, or you could have crafted a few routes to make it more of a run and gun thing. And what's even more inexcusable is they brought this back in Resident Evil 4, which really does put more of a black mark on 3. It's gonna always be the red-headed stepchild of the series. And if the rumours are true that Resident Evil 0 and Code Veronica are coming back with quite big budgets, I just don't know what happened with 3. Why did they just rush it into this little slot and throw it out there for us to all just buy and enjoy until we realised there wasn't really much here? Back to the enemies, zombified dogs and lickers are back, but they're really more cameos than anything else. But yet again, they're in this game and they could have really worked for a certain mode where you defend or last as long as you can and build points up in, I don't know what sort of mode that would have been, but dogs and lickers, they would have really worked. And now I hope nobody's eating, because it's time to talk about the Drain Deimos. These insectoid bastards resemble the Chimera from Resident Evil 1. The Drain Deimos are somehow even worse though, as their primary objective is to invade the throat of their host, and plant their offspring in the stomach. It's nasty shit, and plays into my fear of the Alien franchise, along with the facehuggers. Even though this section's only around for a cup of coffee, most players won't forget their rush for the substation, as they try and avoid Jill getting re-impregnated. Flipping 4 switches and getting the hell out of there is what I always do. And come to think of it, I wouldn't mind an Aliens game in the RE engine, but let's just make sure Randy Pitchford is well away from it.
I think there was a couple things. One, it was probably one of those 7.5 kind of games. It's one of those expectation management things.
Before leaving the streets of Raccoon City, Jill was introduced to one new variety of zombie, and that's the parasite zombie. This actually plays nice into the connective tissue of 3 and 4, with Resident Evil 4 bringing parasites into the series in a major way, and 5 took it to a whole new level thanks to Albert Wesker.
Global saturation.
More of a souped up zombie, waiting for these fuckers to open their face, or mouth, or whatever you want to call that disgusting thing, is when you should attack. Shooting their legs can also trigger this mouth to open, so just do what you can to shoot them, and stay well out of the reach because that tentacle will slap you up. Going against more than one of these can be a death sentence as well. Down in the sewers and in Nest 2 is where we all get introduced to a new nightmare in the Resident Evil games, the Hunter Gammas, the spawn of one man's sick mind. These are failed attempts to replicate Dr. Marcus's lurkers from Resident Evil 0.
No, this can't be! You bitch! You failed me!
Yeah, those giant frogs. This is where I have to stop myself with the lore, otherwise I'm going to go on for another 1,000 words. But again, this is another nice piece of connective tissue, showing that there was real heart and passion going into this project. The giant half-breed frog spawn are an insta-kill if they get too close. Once they open their mouth is when they're at their most deadliest, but this is when to strike, as it's their weak spot. I know they had to eventually return, but that doesn't mean I had to like it. Those bastards from the first Resident Evil are back, and deadlier than ever. You'd think the Hunter Beta in the new era might be a little easier, but no, they're really not. And the Hunter Beta tops the Hunter Alpha from Resident Evil 1. They're more agile, and unlike the Licker, they always know where the player is. They also have the ability to kill Jill or Carlos in one fell swoop, so being ready with a Jill dodge or Carlos's punch is vital here. or when you're Jill, have that shotgun at ready and stunlock those bastards. And with Carlos, I tend to use the flashbang to really get an upper hand. And these betas are improved all thanks to William Birkin. That man just loves creating BOWs. The last enemy in the Resident Evil 3 remake is one that actually debuted in 2019, as it dropped in the Ghost Survivor mode for Resident Evil 2. Pale heads are genetically altered and more twisted forms of the standard zombie, with some added DNA from the Tyrant in the first game, for good measure. After losing their research thanks to a little self-destruct sequence, scientists at Umbrella desperately tried to recover any research they could. As a result, these are far tougher than a standard zombie, all ones with parasites grafted to their head. They take a beating and basically eat ammo. This is all thanks to their overclocked healing factor, though they aren't quite Wolverine, because with one well-placed Magnum round, they're done. Now for the star of the show. This guy is so integral to Resident Evil 3, you just can't imagine it without Nemesis. And that original game went into folklore at one point. I remember people talking about this on the playground and saying that Nemesis could follow you anywhere he wanted. It made you scared playing that game. So instead of your standard video game bosses, much like William Birkin in Resident Evil 2, to an extent, Nemesis is the only boss that you're going to encounter in Resident Evil 3. Created in collaboration with multiple Umbrella labs across the globe, fusing the NE parasite within a T-103 host meant that they had a BOW on their hands like no other.
So it's called the Nemesis.
Nemesis surpassed the Tyrant program in every conceivable way: speed, intelligence, and resilience. He's even able to vocalize his utmost desires. In his initial form, Nemesis towers above anyone and anything in his path, and once the player leaves the substation, they'll find out just how formidable he is. Nemesis doesn't mess about, and he'll go for the kill shot at any cost. And this Tyrant is also uniquely difficult to dodge, as he always tries to go for a combo, but if caught like I mentioned earlier, he'll just combo you into the ground, grabbing you up for a suplex or two, slapping the player about until they're dead. And running away doesn't help much either, as Nemesis will just keep the pace, or swing around overhead, only to dive in for another attack. He also has a scream attack, which took me off guard this time around, as it stuns Jill just long enough for Nemesis to close the gap. Retreating to a safe room or a shop doesn't really help much either, as Nemesis will just wait outside. Literally, he just waits outside or around the corner in some cases. You go out for a second and he's back. This is nothing like Mr. X. What a dick. Escaping into the sewers will only make Nemesis more resourceful, as he'll find new means of killing, with Umbrella dropping a few handy toys for him. Nemesis with a flamethrower isn't something that I thought I needed in my life, but there he is wielding it chaotically, all just to eliminate one STARS member. Battling Nemesis whilst he has the flamethrower is no joke either. Aiming for the fuel tank is obviously the way to go, but the player will have to keep a safe distance, what with the flames quickly engulfing them at a moment's notice. That and Nemesis can break out another combo once the fuel tank's been destroyed, causing a flame shockwave with one slam of the weapon. Now Nemesis has AoE attacks. Beating this stage won't give Jill much of a break either. With Nemesis breaking out his signature weapon, the goddamn rocket launcher.
Rocket launcher? Really?
Looking out for the colour of the laser beam is the only way to survive here, as once it's locked on, it will turn red, so you better be ready with that Jill dodge. Like Birkin, Nemesis will mutate to stay alive, so once he's blown off the subway by Mikhail, the Tyrant takes a more beastly form. Now on all fours, stage 2 is faster than before, but in my opinion, it's far easier to deal with. The attacks and movements of stage 2 are just easier to telegraph, and overall this form is just less chaotic. And by the time you fight this version of Nemesis outside the clock tower, it already becomes a game of Minesweeper, as again, this version of Nemesis just isn't as aggressive. And I found this one putting me into less combos. The second encounter of stage 2 of Nemesis is really a game of red light green light, and after shocking this beast a few times, he seems to go down in just no time. In the third and final stage of Nemesis, we all see this Tyrant become a giant meat wall that sprouted giant tendrils, and you know what they're for, to shoot, but doing a 180 will show the only way to really kill this Tyrant. with a comically sized railgun, but of course it's going to need to be reloaded at least once. Manually, unfortunately. Shooting the exposed cysts will stun Nemesis just long enough to get this done, and with a second shot, or maybe even a third, we can finally say goodbye to this tyrant.
Good riddance.
Straight up, this game is a joy to beat, even though it's really quick to get through. But if the player foregoes any of the extra items in the shop, then beating the game in Inferno would be an absolute nightmare. Nemesis is cranked up to 11 here, and of course there are more enemies to deal with, and as standard, there'll be less ammo and healing items about. So here for the Dominator trophy, and finally the Platinum, this is where the true filter point of Resident Evil 3 Remake would be. Did I use any of the extra weapons or coins in the shop? Well, it's rude to ask a man questions like that, so please, respect my privacy. Showing Nemesis how to really use a rocket launcher though, that'll never get old. After going back to this game and replaying the original, I really have mixed feelings as this video comes to a close. Capcom got so much right with this remake, but then you can really see the corners cut as this game feels rushed to market, with it only coming out just over a year after Resident Evil 2 Remake. And no, I don't think this game should have been a DLC, but it does have the classic expansion feel that we used to get back in the day. You know where the devs have made a sizable chunk of new game, but it's not quite there for a full release. Maybe this remake should have been priced accordingly, then it would have done better in reviews. But again, I was going to buy this regardless when it dropped. Luckily now in 2024, this game is normally always on sale, or it's available on PS Plus or Game Pass, all for nothing physically. It's clear this game was sidelined as Capcom went to knock it out of the park with the Resident Evil 4 remake. Which boy, judging by the rate I'm going, that's going to be a long ass video for sure.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me.
Capcom are in the best shape they've ever been. Even their games that don't quite hit surpass many others in the AAA space. It's a great time to be a Capcom fan, but that doesn't mean we can't criticise them once in a while. And for older fans like myself, we'll always remember the darker times. But right now, I'm looking to take a slight break from Resident Evil and cover a few other games. Resident Evil will probably always be the heart of this channel, but I don't want to pigeonhole myself as a creator, though it won't be long before I'm back in the world of Resident Evil. There's just so much to cover. Yes, Resident Evil 6 will come at some point because I got the platinum in that game. Somehow, I would just like to thank everyone for watching so far. The influx of views, comments and subscribers since my last video took me by surprise. You're all awesome, and from here I'll try and get videos out at a better clip, though I did just pick up a Steam Deck, so that's going to distract me sometimes. I'd also like to thank my sister for the Resident Evil Resistance footage. She really saved me from going back to that game. So with that, I'm going to go and spread liberty throughout the galaxy, and teach some bugs a lesson or two. I'll see you all on Super Earth real soon, so until then, why not help a lad out and throw me a like or a sub, and until the next video, I've been Benroy, no more games.